Hi, welcome to this Open Security Summit in September 21, where we're going to talk about this new idea that we have for creating Open Security Summit projects and consolidation of energy. And we're going to kind of just cover a bit the Semgrep project. So this is going to be a reasonably quick session. It's just about showing a bit what we are, some of the ideas, and the idea is to kickstart the conversation and then have a whole bunch of threads online, but also to, plan what we want to do for the next summit in a couple of months from now. So Semgrep is a really great example of an area that we had some amazing content and amazing sessions already at the summit. So if, the problem is that if you try to find it, right, we don't have an easy way on the website. And if you try to find it, you actually almost need to Google it, right, to find it. And then here we actually have some really, really cool sessions, like scaling our security with Semgrep, where you have a training video, you have, some session slides, embrace security defaults, again, really, really cool content, right? And then if you go into our YouTube channel and you search for Semgrep, right? You also will find that, we had some pretty cool sessions. And and some of them we already split a little bit, but where you can see there, there's some big 2-hour sessions, 1-hour session, 1-hour session. So these are really, really cool sessions that we've done in the past, and there's some really great nuggets that we already extracted. The challenge is, how do you find it, right? And Semgrep is, for me, one of those technologies that I think has really brought a lot of innovation to the static analysis, and they're being very pragmatic, very focused. It adds really, really cool value. And even for my teams or the people I want to point to, I still feel that I want a place where I can say, hey, go there, check it out. There's a community around it. Go and get more information, learn from it. Find even the Semgrep official resources, etc. And and the summit, from the beginning has always be about collaboration, finding a safe environment for people to share ideas, to participate, to collaborate. And so the idea of the projects is exactly that, right? So we now have a new section here called OSS Projects, and you can start to map it out, what it is. And a good example is the SVS user stories. And this is a very, very early stage, but it's already gives you a sense where we want to put the videos in, put the projects that have gone into the DevSecOps is another good example of, we actually have quite a large amount of content, right? That basically it's pretty cool and amazing content, right? So it's, how do you package this? How do you put it together? And then if we go to Semgrep, it's very early days. Again, this is a good example of, it needs to be mapped, right? We need to add the sessions, even that I found there. We need to connect the dots. So I guess our job for the next 2 months as a community is to make this a great page for Semgrep. In terms of how it works from a structure point of view, the whole website is powered by Hugo, which is a static site generator. And basically all the content is basically here on this page, right? So in fact, if you go in here to the index page, you see the different sections. You see the titles, the layout, the description, the highlight videos, etc. So if I show you one that has a bit more meat, right? For example, DevSecOps, you see that that's where you map, for example, the active members, the highlight videos. We're adding a new section for videos, right? So I think there's one here that has it. Let me just show that. I think is the control framework maps has a bit of an example of the video mapping. So yeah, so here's again, trying to create some metadata and some information. So we have a lot of flexibility on this. We have a lot of flexibility in the structure. The point here is to empower the community to make the most out of this, right? So in fact, one of the ideas is to add sub pages here, for example, FAQ, resources, who's who, where to start, best guides, slides, presentations, videos, etc. So we can have those sub pages that then we can then link from the actual Semgrep page, for example, and again, really empower the community. And some projects might take the next level. For example, if you look at the ASVS user stories, they already have a repo for it where they're actually putting a lot of really, really powerful content And, for example, here configuration. In fact, what I really, really would love to see is the cross-fertilization between the projects, right? So, for example, this project is all about automating and creating user stories for, for parts of the ASVS, which is basically, the whole, application security verification guidance. Well, guess what? Semgrep could add a lot of value because Semgrep could actually verify a lot of these, right? So the other very interesting opportunity here is this sort of cross-fertilization between one project and another project, and really basically, figure out how to connect the dots and get, those things working together. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of it, right? Let's create an area where we can collaborate on in this particular case, a project like Semgrep, make it super easy for new users to learn, make it super easy to find the amazing content that we already created in Open Security Summit, another content that exists out there, and fundamentally, help people to learn and to collaborate and to make the most, for example, of this tool. And there you go. In a nutshell, that's the project. Any comments or?
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I do have a question. Go ahead first. Sorry.
I was just going to mention you posted, Michael. Maybe that you want to talk to that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. No, I just spent a little bit of time a couple of weeks ago looking at at some rules on Semgrep. One thing that took my attention is the default rule set that is available for Flask is not able to catch some of the cross-site scripting. So I created a very basic Flask application, and I run the rollback that is by default. What it took my attention is that default rollback didn't catch the actual vulnerability. I had to write a custom rule, very, very simple stuff, but it proves the value and the flexibility that it provides, I was wondering if there is a specific team focused on a language specific, let's say rule sets. I don't know if rule sets is the right word. But yeah, maybe in rule packs, or I don't know how do they call it in this context.
That was something I wanted to talk about too. It's the first thing I was thinking about when Dinis was saying, hey, cross-pollinate with ASVS is what Semgrep is and what it is not. So you found like an example of a framework, right, in Python that it is not working correctly, or maybe just not, you'd think it would catch this, simple example. But I at where I work at, it's we kind of have very limited, not limited, but just really specific use cases on when we could use it, when we can't. And a lot of it has to do with, I think, how mature your application is, and meaning that you have more and more frameworks, right, that get piled on throughout the years, more languages that get piled on throughout the years, et cetera, and it becomes kind of this, I think the cross-site scripting is a good example where you have the interrogation of data flow, right? So depending on how mature, you have a very simple application here, but if you could imagine, say if I have JavaScript and Java, and then a couple of frameworks in between, for instance, Spring, and yet, I don't know, Node or something, right? Then it becomes not really a good use case for Semgrep because it has to traverse, the taint and pass that taint through, through those different frameworks and languages, which I think in most, I don't know how many applications are out there, but you would think that most mature applications or most popular ones are going to have multi-framework, multi-language, kind of scenarios, right? And all the injection vulnerabilities tend to follow this pattern of data flow. So anyway, that's my 2 bits.
No, that's a great answer. Thank you for.
But ultimately, right? I feel that the power of, I think, something like Semgrep, right? And because they have open source a lot of the rules, right? If not all, at least most of them, right? Is the fact that we now have a fighting chance to start to create community-driven rules, right? And because ultimately, the problem I always found with static analysis is that, like Brandon was saying, right? It's like is not just one flavor. You need to almost support an insane number of frameworks, insane number of variations. And the bottom line is every company, they create their own version of it, right? Because there's no point of saying, hey, this framework has done this, because every company either invents their own framework or takes a particular framework and uses in specific ways that has to be taken into context. So I actually think that one of the cool things that the summit can actually help, right, is the creation of those rule packs. I think it would be amazing to, for example, Michael, can you do a session, right, next summit where you just walk us through, like, look, for example, I want to write a rule, right, and I think it would be really cool to do a session where you just walk us through exactly what you've done, right? Because for static analysis, we need more people in the world that know how to write rules, right, to understand the power of being able to codify what you're thinking in a rule, so then you scale, right, in your analysis, right? And I think Semgrep brings that to the table, because they bring in an open source engine and an open source rule pack, where in the past we couldn't do that, because even if you wrote a rule, and a lot of the times you'll be connected to a proprietary engine, right? So I think there's a lot of value, and and the good news is you find a gap and you're able to do something about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that I've been, this topic passions me a lot. The other one is dependencies. One of the use cases I would like to see is if we could, write a specific rule set that you can go through a specific open source packages, dependencies like, NPM or even Python, and be able to identify vulnerabilities on well-known packages, specifically for supply chain, right? I mean, but in the last few years, I believe since 2014, I believe we have seen a lot of issues with dependencies, and that would be an interesting case of applying Semgrep in a research. Like you can actually go through the registry and be able to apply a set of specific rules and be able to identify vulnerabilities that have not been disclosed on public and very well used libraries. That's something that's still in my head. Sometimes when I look at the dependencies and I look at this language that is very flexible, the way you formulate the rules is very powerful. One question I have had is, what is the current support for .NET? Specifically, as .NET in particularly .NET Core is gaining a lot of traction, right? So I'm not sure how much is the support for .NET at the moment.
Well, I remember last time that there was some support. If I remember correctly, they were saying it was not a first-class citizen of all the languages, but I think they were adding of it. But look, I think the thing about a lot of these ones is it's now about trying it out, right, and finding the blind spots, right? Because the hardest part sometimes is the integration with the CI pipelines. Look, more and more, if you cannot easily put that in a pipeline where you show the results in the pull requests, it becomes too painful, right? And that is the minimum also these days, right? And I know Semgrep has some integrations with that, and I feel that again. But look, I think the good news is again here, like we actually have some of the Semgrep guys presenting, right? And so I like the idea of Michael. You said, look, I want to learn more about Semgrep.net. The best way to do it is set up a session, right, and then invite the people and then have a conversation about it.
Definitely, definitely, yeah, exactly.
That's the way to do it, right? And ultimately, that's the power of the summit, right? Like we should be leveraging the summit to do that, because a lot of the best summit sessions has been somebody has a problem or an idea. Look, I've done that even for things I cared about, right? You create a session, then you invite people for the session, right? And then it's easy for them to join because it's about something that they're interested in, and then as long as you have a good description, a good idea of what needs to happen, then we can get a good answer.
Absolutely.
One of the things, Michael, that you brought up with the supply chain, one of the problems that we have is really not necessarily with languages and frameworks, but it's package managers when you talk about supply chain. And I don't know if anyone knows this, but Maven 3, right? Everyone uses Maven 3. I know this is not .NET, but it certainly is prevalent in the managed code for Java world, is that Maven 3 doesn't really effectively identify transient dependencies. And it falls short just by architecture on really being able to solve for, you know, the supply chain problem that you just mentioned. So it's a hard problem to solve. And I know for certain that, you know, Semgrep doesn't have any kind of analyzer to interrogate, you know, package managers. And also on top of that, you look at a ton of research that's out there, right? Like Sonatype has done a ton of research. Black Duck, I probably, you know, White Source has probably contributed a certain amount. Dependency Track, Steve Springett's project, right? I work with Steve, and there's a lot to be said for the research. It's one thing to feed a database, take a database, right, of known vulnerabilities and being able to identify.
Yeah,
but, but the research is really, I know that like Sonatype is probably a product leader just on research alone. But anyway, and that's a commercial product, right? But anyway, I think the problem statement that you presented on the surface, you know, there's probably a few use cases, but when you, at the end of the day, right, you really want attribution, right?
Yeah.
Forget about this whole supply chain business, right? Like who the heck contributed to this code, right? And I want to know kind of like, is this some kind of like rogue developer? Can I trust this developer? Because you could have certainly fantastic projects, right, with some very good developers, and then you get some bad developers in. It's just like companies, right? So really, what you want to ask is attribution, and then being able to, you know, provide that attribution to specific people or groups and ferret that out. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
That's great. That's great. I've been very involved in security operations lately. Specifically in threat hunting. So my way of seeing things is, for example, in threat hunting, you start out with a hypothesis. So let's say, for example, there is a package that is very well known use, let's say JSON library to parse whatever. So your hypothesis is, you know, this library is potentially vulnerable to injection, or is it potentially vulnerable to, let's say, top 5 vulnerabilities? And you go there and try to use this kind of tool to identify that hypothesis that you have formulated. It's probably, I am biased maybe because, as I said, I've been very focused on security operations lately, but I think it's a good avenue for research, right? Specifically for package management, I raised an issue to Microsoft like a couple of months ago that unfortunately they don't recognize as a vulnerability, but it's the fact that you can manipulate the statistics. Usually, when you are going to install a library, statistics or metrics are important, right? So you can know how many downloads they have per day, but I found that you can push a rogue library on top of that, and then you can start modifying or you know, performing random requests in order to modify the statistics. So easily you can put your package at the very top, and that package could be a type of squad, right? Or could be manipulated some way that is bad, you know, has a specific vulnerability, and then you can do stuff. So I think in the supply chain there is still a lot of stuff to do, you know.
So Michael, that's very interesting, because one of the metrics literally that a lot of people use is that, okay, I'm going to use this package because there's a lot of other people use, so I'm not going to be the
using
first
it, yeah,
to be owned, right? And literally that's sometimes the only metric you got: number of stars, number of this, number of that, right? So absolutely. And actually, you know, what's interesting about it, you know, is also, and I think this is where you bring it back to Semgrep, is that I think there is a really good you know, future here for even having specific Semgrep rules for specific libraries, so that when, you know, I use a vulnerable library, actually the Semgrep can help me to determine, am I vulnerable or not? You know, for me, one of the challenges that, you know, one of the things I never really liked, you know, from the whole, you know, vulnerability management side of things. Oh, no, Michael. I was just saying that one of the things that would be quite interesting is to use Semgrep rules to determine, you know, what parts of a particular library are vulnerable or even are safe, right? Because remember that Semgrep also, has a lot of good ideas to pick up what's good and what's bad, right? Like don't use this, but also use this, right? So as a good model, right? So I really like this idea that we can start to define a set of rules that, for example, if you find a particular vulnerability or a particular version,
Dependency,
it would be good to
yeah.
have a rule that tells you, all right, you need to be using that method, right? You need to be using that thing, because sometimes it's also like not very practical from an engineering point of view, right? To go and says patch this, patch that, patch that, because you might have all of these things to patch, but then which one is more important? And clearly, if I have 20, in fact, if I have 20 highs and maybe 15 or 20 mediums, but there's 2 mediums that are actually wired up to my actual codes, and the other ones are all in parts of the code base that we don't use, then ironically, those 2 mediums are more important than everything else, right? So being able to say this function is only vulnerable, is the one that is vulnerable, is super powerful. And I think Semgrep, in a way, this is where you don't need taint propagation, right? You know the inputs, right? You know the places that you're vulnerable. In fact, they were patched, right? In fact, there's an argument to be said that part of the moral or the requirement that we should put on library maintainers is to issue rules for the past when you've patched a security vulnerability. Do you know what I mean? So basically saying, okay, it's nice and good for you to say upgrade to this version, but sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you have breaking changes. Sometimes it's not trivial to make that change, but we don't have an easy way to detect, yes, I might be vulnerable. I might be using version 2.76 and 2.9 is fixed, but if the bits of 2.76 that is vulnerable, I'm not using, then that's not a problem. And maybe it becomes a problem if somebody actually start using those parts of the code, right?
And probably that's I went to the supply chain a little bit, but I think it's related. If you look at that article that I wrote, I believe there is a disconnection, because I can deploy or push a version that is totally different from what you can see in GitHub. So how do you know that the release one matches what the code is in there? And the reason why I highlight that one is because I pushed a package into into NuGet, and there is not any repo in GitHub. So there is, I can essentially ramp it up without having a repository in GitHub, right? With the code, you just extrapolate the things. But I see a lot of like avenue to start. Like for research, from the research point of view, you have a hypothesis. I think it would be interesting to see Semgrep, because I see a lot of avenues, but maybe I'm just biased. I don't know.
No, man. Look, I think the power of Semgrep, it allows these things to happen, right? Ultimately, Semgrep is a very powerful querying language, right? And a very powerful query environment, and is driven by rules, right? So what you then make the rules and what you make the environment that goes into, it's now up for the community, right? To evolve it, right?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Cool.
Awesome.
So any other ideas what we can do from a project point of view here, and other things we can do from the summit to help and to add to this page? All right. So I guess we'll evolve it, right? We'll this is a good example of this. We're going to DevOps this, right? Like start small, iterate fast, right? Do it quickly. We're actually going to get a developer also on the summit team to put a bit of extra design and functionality on this. So cool. Well, look, any other comments or questions you guys want to raise?
Yeah, I like your idea on the secure coding, mapping it. That you brought up earlier. I think that's something that would be great to add.
Yeah.
For starters.
And I was just thinking, Michael, I really like your idea of answering the question. For example, what is the level of support for the languages, right? Which again, we can have a section here per language, right? And then, and that could have again, like
even
sometimes
sorry, for making decisions,
Yeah,
right? From risk management, you wanted to see, sorry, I'm on mute. Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, I believe from the risk management point of view, you really want to understand what is the support level at the moment. To see, for example, if you are writing in or you know, working on a project that is very focused on .NET, what is like at the maturity now, and how's it going to be, let's say, the roadmap for the next year or things like that, so you can make an informed decision right now in terms of support, or start adopting that, or you know, just from the risk management point of view.
Yeah. No, I agree with you, man. So cool. Look, you know, please keep being involved, right? Let's take this to the next level. Let's put some energy behind this. And so that, Michael, you definitely have to do a session in the next summit about, you know, your article and the stuff and experience, because that's the real world, right? Like that's a really nice, good, practical session, right? That, you know, we can do, you know, we just, you know, set up some environments. I know that Semgrep has some online stuff that is also easy to use. So, so again, let's do a practical session, right? And the objective is for people to write a couple of rules. Even if we're just replicating the rules that you wrote, you know, with your default app, that's already a great exercise to get people writing Semgrep rules.
Yeah, sure, definitely. I mean, that example I wrote is pretty basic. Probably it's not production ready, but at least, you know, allow me to understand how it works and you know, how to build rules on top of that. I think that's the first step, and you can evolve it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Adam is here. So Adam, can you create a session for Michael? Then you figure out the time for him. It's in November, man, so you have time to find in your schedule.
Yeah,
that's fine. I'll send him through what dates we've got available, and I can get on that.
Cool. Sounds good.
That's good.
All right, guys. So I think we can wrap it up. So we can.
That's a good conversation, by the way. Yeah, that's all.